Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Nick Donzie, and I serve on the board of directors of the Foundation for the Restoration of St. Genevieve. Our next presenter, Rebecca Ramey, holds a BA degree in history from SIU Carbondale, and she is currently pursuing a master's degree in history with an archaeology-focused thesis. Her past experience includes being a field technician, a curator's assistant, and a historical archaeology field school head graduate assistant at the SIU Center for Archaeological Investigations. Ms. Ramey has also participated in archaeological investigations along the Trail of Tears, a rock shelter on private lands, Fort Kaskaskia, and at the Lake Ralph Hall Project in Ladonia, Texas. And in her spare time, Rebecca is also an active member of the U.S. Army Reserves, and we thank her for that. Please welcome Rebecca Ramey as she presents Resurrecting the Lost City of Kaskaskia, an Archival, GIS, and Archaeological Investigation of Illinois' first capital.
Is this better?
Yes.
Cool. All right. Little change on my introduction there. My BA is actually in anthropology with a specialization in archaeology. My master's is in history. So before I begin, I would like to thank the conference organizers for inviting me to speak at this event. It's not very often that a master's student gets invited to present their thesis research at a professional conference, and I'm humbled and honored to have been asked. I would also like to apologize for any of my French pronunciations. I took Spanish in high school. I had no idea I would be pursuing French colonial studies or anything French related. So please blame all of my pronunciation on my fiance and his 2 years of high school French. Okay? So my research centers around Kaskaskia, Illinois, the role it played as a governmental center in the region, its diasporic population, its destruction, and its eventual recovery through archaeological means. So basically, if Kaskaskia is mentioned, my ears perk up. I'm like, ooh, what are we talking about? I want to know about that. So Kaskaskia, Illinois was founded in 1703 as a Jesuit missionary site to the Kaskaskia Indian tribe by Jesuit Father Marist. They settled in the area of modern-day Kaskaskia after being forced out of north-central Illinois, near modern-day Utica, and if anybody's heard of Starved Rock State Park, it's that area, due to altercations with other Native American tribes. They discovered this new region of what was to be Illinois quite appealing, as did French fur traders. This area offered access to the Mississippi River, which even at this time served as a major highway for trade for the Native Americans and the French. Even the fur traders' wives found it appealing, which is not always the case for other fur trading towns and posts. Even then, the sentiment of happy wife, happy life applied. The town was now growing and encompassing a wide range of individuals to include the Jesuits, their African slaves, Kaskaskia Indians, French fur traders, and their wives. In June of 1723, Inspector General to the colony, M. Diron d'Artaguette, conducted a census. In this census, he recorded 64 inhabitants of Kaskaskia, 41 white laborers, 37 married women, and 54 children. This number would continue to grow as the years progressed and as the census began to include more than just the white population. Life in the village under the French regime resembled that of other French colonial towns from Canada to New Orleans. The day began with the sun, with breakfast between 7 and 8 o'clock, with dinner at noon as the principal meal of the day, consisting of fresh meats, boiled, roasted, fricasseed, or stewed, soup with bread swimming in it, fruit preserves, tiny round cheeses, and sweetened milk. Access to commerce kept the residents of the village well fed. Women would spend their day baking bread or doing the wash in the river, while the men hunted or farmed the land. While no longer visible on the modern landscape, the village would have been filled with French-style houses with vertical logs filled with rocks and mortar and large verandas, known as poteau en terre and poteau sur sol. If you want examples of these, I've got a few here that you may recognize as they are from your beautiful town. Unfortunately, this peaceful lifestyle would not last as tensions were rising between the French and British and their aligned native partners. The French considered Kaskaskia such an important epicenter in this region that they were granted the political power and a French garrison to protect the region from the British in 1747. In 1753, the orders were given to construct Fort Kaskaskia, which was built on the adjacent bluff overlooking the town. It was constructed on the backs of slave labor provided by the Jesuits. It was all for naught, as the French would lose the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, and the French garrison, as well as the Jesuits and their slaves, would be forced to abandon Kaskaskia, along with the fort in 1763. This would end Kaskaskia's time as a French colonial town, as it would now fall into the hands of the British. And this is what they theorized the fort looked like. Okay, so now I understand this is a French colonial studies conference, but please bear with me as I talk about the British. They paved the way for the Americans and therefore my eventual research. So England gained control of Kaskaskia in 1763 with the signing of the Treaty of Paris. However, British troops would not officially march on Kaskaskia until 1765, when a detachment of British 42nd Regiment of Foot would be sent to Kaskaskia and neighboring villages. They would eventually settle in the recently reconstructed Fort de Chartres. When this fort fell into disrepair in 1772, they moved into the town of Kaskaskia and established Fort Gage. The term fort is used loosely in this connotation, as it did not resemble a traditional fort. Instead, they occupied the old stone house that the Jesuits abandoned in 1763, and they surrounded it with a picket fence and built 2 wooden bastions in which they placed 2 small cannons and a few swivel guns. If it wasn't for these cannons and swivel guns, you would think you were in the suburbs. This makeshift fort would not have a long history. In the years between 1765 and 1776, the British would occupy the land, but the residents of Kaskaskia would govern themselves, as the British had little actual control in the area. The people of Kaskaskia petitioned for better ruling than what the British officers serving as commandants provided, but with civil unrest in the east, they were largely ignored. The British would desert Kaskaskia as the civil unrest in the east began to grow and more troops were needed in the region. The last of the British troops left Kaskaskia in 1776, with Captain Hugh Lord leaving a Frenchman by the name of Philippe Francois de Rastel de Rocheblave, what a mouthful, in charge. Rocheblave would warn the British that by leaving the Illinois country vulnerable to attack, they would lose to the civil unrest. His words rang true when in 1778, the Americans arrived. George Rogers Clark would march into Kaskaskia with a company of 175 men in 1778, overpowering what little British garrison that remained. Clark would make the claim to the people of Kaskaskia that the Americans guaranteed the inhabitants religious freedom and property rights, and that the Americans were aligned with their people, meaning the French. It was stated in Clark's journal that the people of Kaskaskia at this statement enthusiastically declared their loyalty to the American cause. In actuality, the people of Kaskaskia likely just accepted the new rule, as they had no fondness for the British to begin with, and they would have done so without the dramatic episodes Clark describes. 2 years later, Clark and his men were forced out of Illinois, and Kaskaskia was once again left to its own devices. Kaskaskia was being treated like the child no government wanted. Even though it had technically gone through British occupation and was now governed by America, its culture and population remained almost entirely French. The town still retained all aspects of French colonial culture. That was until John Dodge, which, nice mugshot of him there, was sent by Thomas Jefferson, who at the time was governor of Virginia, to serve as an Indian agent in 1779. Instead of helping the town, Dodge formed a band of thugs to wreak havoc upon Kaskaskia. He even went as far as to aim cannons from the old French fort on the town. His reign of terror consisted of cheating, extorting, and abusing the people of Kaskaskia, and it would last until 1787, when he would move on to the Spanish claim site of the Mississippi River. He became your guys' problem. His occupation of Kaskaskia decimated the town's population and ended any semblance of French colonial town. When Clark took the town over from the British, Kaskaskia had 194 households. Dodge reduced that number to just 44. However, Kaskaskia was not done being the center of importance for the region. It was just a setback. In 1787, with the passing of the Northwest Ordinance, Kaskaskia became part of the Northwest Territory. In 1795, Randolph County was formed, and Kaskaskia was selected to serve as its county seat. In 1809, the Illinois Territory would be formed, and Kaskaskia would be named the capital of the territory, hosting the governor and secretary, and would provide the meeting place for territorial legislature. Kaskaskia was bouncing back from the population decimation caused by John Dodge. When Illinois was granted statehood in 1818, Kaskaskia would be named the capital. They would lose this designation in 1819, but retained its designation as county seat until 1847. However, even with the loss of political authority, Kaskaskia was still home to important people, including Sidney Breese, who would later become a U.S. Senator. By the time Kaskaskia had lost its county seat, it had experienced major floods, the Great Flood of 1844, a tornado, and an earthquake. The Great Flood of 1844 was the first glimpse into the future of destruction that awaited Kaskaskia. The destruction of the flood was documented by Ferdinand Maxwell, who was the city clerk at the time. He wrote, "This day, June 28 AD, 1844, I have witnessed the whole town of Kaskaskia inundated by the high water, some 7 feet upon an average. The whole population of the place removed over on the hills or highlands opposite, and a great many took shelter at Colonel Pierre Menard's house. Many houses were carried off by the water. The water commenced rising about the 12th of June and commenced falling about 5 o'clock p.m. this 20th day of June. Whole houses were swept away, broken off their foundations by the rushing floodwaters. As if the flood itself was not devastating enough, Kaskaskia was hit with a deadly epidemic once the floodwaters had receded. This epidemic was most likely caused by contaminated water, and it swung another devastating blow to the town. The people who had chosen to rebuild after the flood suffered the loss of illness. The population was reduced, but still present until the devastating impact of the changing course of the Mississippi River. By the mid-1860s, Kaskaskia would see the change that would forever reshape the town. In these years, the Mississippi River would begin to change its course at an accelerated rate, boosted by human activities. The invention of the steamboat was miraculous for the trade goods, but devastating to the landscape of the riverbank of the Mississippi. The consumption of deciduous trees that once lined the riverbanks was accelerated in the later half of the 19th century, as lumber was needed for powering steamboats and building houses to accommodate the continually expanding population. Woodcutters, conforming to the laws of supply and demand, bought permissions from landowners to harvest the trees that lined the riverbanks. They would cut the logs and stack them along the bank to sell to the ships passing by once they exhausted an area. They would move on to the next. In Illinois, this practice was exceptionally devastating, as most trees were confined to the border of a river, with the rest of the land being prairie. These deciduous trees and thick undergrowth that naturally accompanied them on the riverbanks served an important purpose. They were responsible for holding the riverbank in place, protecting against erosion. Kaskaskia was host to the trifecta of disaster when it came to the Mississippi River course changing. First, they were an important trade stop, making it the perfect area for steamboats to refuel and for people to build houses and settle down. The town fell between two rivers, the Mississippi and the Kaskaskia, meaning it was being logged on all sides, weakening the banks on all sides of the town. Lastly, it existed on the bend in the Mississippi and Kaskaskia rivers, which from reports, these areas are known to have the heaviest erosion. With nothing left to protect the town from the forces of nature, the Mississippi River embarked on a life-altering course, carving a new channel to merge with the Kaskaskia River Channel. Throughout the 1870s, the distance between the Mississippi River and the Kaskaskia River Channel was becoming smaller. However, it was not until the winter of 1880-1881 that they would truly merge, and life in Kaskaskia would be forever changed. The winter was harsh, heavy snow and thick ice existed all the way down to Cairo, Illinois, with ice thickness at St. Louis reaching 2 feet. The first thaw that spring occurred on the northern end of the river, causing water levels to rise 8 feet in a single day in St. Louis. The rise in water levels broke the heavy ice into chunks, sending it careening downstream to pile up near Kaskaskia, unable to make it around the river's natural bend. It tore at the bank and ripped through all obstacles, taking out the remaining strip of land that separated the Mississippi River and the Kaskaskia River. In April of 1881, the Mississippi River began to flow into the Kaskaskia, just north of the town. By the mid-1880s, the flow would become permanent. The Kaskaskia River bend is significantly smaller than the Mississippi's, and it could not accommodate the sudden influx of water. With the eastern bank of the Kaskaskia River being limestone bluffs and resistant to erosion, there was only one direction for the riverbank could expand, and that was directly into Kaskaskia. With the bank unable to expand east, water began cutting away the western bank of the Kaskaskia River, which was now the Mississippi, and the eastern edge of the town. The damage was not immediate but gradual, giving people time to salvage belongings before whole houses were swallowed by the river. And as you can see here, this is a house in the process of, unfortunately, falling into the river. However, by 1892, the Church of Immaculate Conception and 3 cemeteries of Kaskaskia, the Catholic, the Protestant, and the Masonic, were being threatened by the Mississippi. In 1893, the cemeteries were moved to Garrison Hill, where it resides today. You can actually go visit the cemetery. While the church was salvaged brick by brick and moved approximately 2 miles inland. You can also still visit this church. The same salvage process was conducted for the state building and the original courthouse. All these buildings can still be visited in modern Kaskaskia, and the Catholic Church still conducts weekly Sunday Mass. After the movement of the cemeteries to Garrison Hill and the removal of important buildings from their original locations, this is when historians began to write Kaskaskia off, stating it only exists in a variety of artifacts, written documents, and photographs. I did not accept the sentiment that Kaskaskia was gone, and it is here that my research truly begins. I approached recovering Kaskaskia in a myriad of ways to include archival research, and this includes conducting oral histories with current and past residents of the town of Kaskaskia, GIS, and archival methods. The 2 main works on Kaskaskia that exist are Kaskaskia Under the French Regime by Natalia Marie Belting and Kaskaskia, the Lost Capital of Illinois by David MacDonald and Rain Waters. And to no fault of their own, they both come to the same conclusions, which is that Kaskaskia was lost following the devastation in the last portion of the 19th century, which, if it's not on the surface, it's easy to say it's not there. However, if that was the case, then I would be out of a job. And the locals of Kaskaskia also offer a different perspective on this. Bill Crete was born on Kaskaskia Island on June 4th, 1939. He was one of 6 children to be raised by William and Laureen Buett Crete. They were one of the last families to have a house in Old Kaskaskia. It was a 2-room house that was not moved further inland into New Kaskaskia until April of 1939, 58 years after the supposed total loss of Kaskaskia. Bill describes his childhood as nothing but hunting, fishing, and fun. He recalls at least 30 to 40 families living in Kaskaskia in his youth. There were enough children to warrant the operation of 3 schools. It was only after the floods of 1950, 1973, and 1993 that the childhood Bill remembers could no longer exist in Kaskaskia. Laws were enacted that prevented people from rebuilding on the island after the 1993 flood. If your house survived, you were allowed to return. If it did not, you had to find somewhere else to live. This is the truly devastating blow to the town's population. After having recorded oral histories from several current and former residents of the town, one thing remains consistent. They will always consider Kaskaskia home, and if they couldn't move back, they would. And I would just like to point out, this is Bill Crete's mom and aunt and his siblings. He was not born yet, but he would be here soon. And this is their house in the 1935 flood, which prompted them moving. It ended up underwater. What truly kicked off this investigative process of determining how much of the original town could still exist was the discovery of a historical map of Kaskaskia in Abraham Lincoln Library by my advisor, Dr. Mark Wagner, which you may know of him because he has done work with both of the Fort Kaskaskias. This map was created by Sidney Breese in the 1830s, who at the time was Postmaster General for the town. This map is exceptionally unique because Breese not only illustrated property lines, but he also included houses and recorded the head of each household. This means that not only did I stand a chance at potentially recovering a house foundation, but I also had a name to put to the house as well, which doesn't happen very often, especially when things are not well documented or we don't have a labeled plat map. The other map of interest, and probably the most interest to you all in this room, was the 1765 map of Kaskaskia created by Philip Pittman. It depicts what remained of French Kaskaskia when encountered by the British. Using ArcGIS software, I layered both maps over the modern landscape. What these layers show is that 60% of the original town has the potential to exist in the archaeological context. and those areas are outlined here in red. I don't know if you noticed the same thing I noticed, which is, well, this looks really cool to show off, but man, is this hard to interpret. So I created polygon layers, which is a very fancy way of saying I drew shapes on the map, and now I have a working map layer. And so by creating these polygon layers, you are able to see a little bit better in these outlines of red just how much has the potential to exist on the current landscape. This is the Philip Pittman map. This is the whole of the Greece map, and there's a lot going on with the Greece map, so I broke it down into several different layers. So you have the whole map here, and then you have houses and property lines, like labeled property boundaries here, and then we go into houses. And I know they're hard to see, but they are there. There were a number of factors that went into choosing the house site, such as percentage of preservation, adding to the narrative, and landowner's permission. I wanted to bring something new into the story of Kaskaskia and not continue to contribute to the Eurocentric narrative. With these parameters in mind, I landed on the house site of Jacques Medy, who was a Métis gentleman, meaning half French, half Native American, who worked for the federal government as an interpreter on treaties between the federal government and Native American tribes in the region. Like most minority groups, Métis individuals are generally hard to track in the historical record. Thankfully, because of his work as an interpreter, I can track his movements through the region by following the treaties he is listed on. Between the years of 1815 and 1832, Medy is listed as the interpreter on 16 treaties, with one happening between the federal government and Kaskaskia tribe in 1832, placing him in the town of Kaskaskia at the time of the creation of the Greece map. So here you can see Jacques Medy, United States interpreter. They were so nice to put him on there for me. And here I broke it down for individuals that I know for sure are not white. So those labeled in green, I know for sure are of African American descent. They were most likely free blacks at the time. And then Jacques Medy is here in pretty purple. Once I had established that it was his house site I wished to investigate, it was time to employ remote sensing equipment to establish where in his proposed property boundary had the best potential to yield results. Using coordinates provided by the ArcGIS overlay, a plastic stake was placed in each corner of the property, with the exception of the southeast corner, which was moved south 9 meters, and the northeast corner, which was moved south 14 meters and 40 centimeters. This was done to square the grid to make it easier to survey. As the purple back here, like this shape here, that is the property boundary as per the map overlay. The tannish orange color is how I changed the grid to make it easier to survey. I just prayed his house wasn't in this tiny little section. I then surveyed the property every meter, which is standard for a magnetometer survey. Once the data was processed, the magnetometer picked up a few anomalies, but not anything that resembled a foundation line. And I know some of you are looking at this going, clearly that's a linear anomaly. What the heck are you talking about? My battery died on this survey line. So unfortunately, it has to be completely excluded. The battery died. And anomaly 1, there was a washout in the field in this area. So I chose to exclude that as well. External factors on the surface could make it exclusionary to the data. And for 3, there was a steel property marker in the field. So anything from lines 40 and beyond, we're picking up the steel property marker. So that left me anomalies 2 and 4. So those are the ones I chose to focus on for the GPR survey. So moving on to the GPR, the decision was made to make the grid smaller and focus on the area where the magnetometer picked up anomalies. The process data of the GPR indicated a few anomalies, with once again nothing being a clear indication of a house foundation. So I've got 3 anomalies. I got one here, and I know, again, too, you're like, wow, that's pretty linear. It didn't come through very strong as compared to 3 and 1. And all of this background noise, which I will present later on in this paper, it is picking up old plow scars. So the field has had archaeological, good lord, agricultural practices for hundreds of years, and that leaves a scar on the soil. And I was actually picking those up with the GPR, which unfortunately I couldn't completely eradicate those out of the results, which makes for very messy results. So I decided to place two 2 by 1 meter units over the biggest anomalies that appeared in both sets of data, focusing on the anomalies, focusing on 3 and 1 here. So I placed them over those anomalies, or at least that had been my intention. Upon reviewing my methods and results while writing my thesis, I discovered that I had mistakenly read the data incorrectly for the GPR, and I did not place the units over the anomalies. They were, however, adjacent to the anomalies, and artifacts dating to the correct period were indeed recovered. I hate admitting a mistake in front of a room full of people who I'm sure have never made a mistake in their life. But here I am, admitting my mistake. That being said, TU1, which is this guy right here, was excavated down to 100 centimeters below datum, but, which is a full meter below the ground. I could get in this unit and it was almost as tall as I was, for reference here, if you guys don't know your metric system. But it never became sterile or transitioned into a previous occupation period. I never hit any pre-contact artifacts, and even at 100 centimeters below datum, I was still recovering artifacts. TU2, which is this guy right here, and you can still see things in the floor of the unit, and this is the last level, was excavated down to 80 centimeters below datum, and it too never became sterile or transitioned into a previous occupation period. Time, or lack thereof, was the main contributing factor as to why neither were dug deeper. I was rushing to finish before the landowner needed to put crops in, and also the Army was sending me to South Korea for a month, so I had limited time to get this done. What I did discover was a historical layer is buried under approximately 40 to 50 centimeters of alluvium river deposit, which is flood deposit. And under that is an old plow zone that extends to at least 60 centimeters below datum. So I know only a few of us in here are archaeologists, so I will explain here. I know it's hard to see in this wall. I promise it's easier to see in the field, which is why I have the lovely map we draw in the field. And you can see here, there were several different layers of soil changes that we broke through. And all of those from like here up were sterile. There was no artifacts in them. It is just continual river deposit, even from the historical plow layer. And you can see this lighter color soil and these linear lines here. Those are all the old plow scars, which is all of the messy data I was picking up with the GPR. So it made sense now when I saw those. It was also confirmed when I discovered an old plow tooth in the 60 centimeter below datum range. So it's lovely when you have confirmation of what you think is going on. Analysis of the artifacts recovered shows that a total of 3,879 individual artifacts were recovered between the 2 units, which is a lot of artifacts for just 2 units. I want to preface this. These artifacts varied in type from ceramics, metal, faunal bone, glass, and brick. TU1 produced 1,685 artifacts compared to the 2,193 artifacts produced from TU2. I think TU2 was actually closer to being on the anomaly than TU1 was. One artifact was recovered from a pile of back dirt, which you can't tell location from back dirt. We were screening both units in similar locations, so it's just a low, lonely artifact with no home. The most lucrative level for The most lucrative level for both units was level 4, which fell between 60 and 70 centimeters below datum, which is right in that top of that historical plow zone. So as they were plowing the fields, they were actually bringing up artifacts from lower layers and bringing them up into this layer, which made it so that more artifacts fell into this layer. However, at level 5, which was 70 to 80 centimeters below datum, and level 6, which was 80 to 100 centimeters below datum, still produced hundreds of artifacts. Brick fragments and limestone accounted for a majority of the artifacts. And yes, I did count each individual brick fragment and limestone fragment because apparently I have no life outside of archaeology. But ceramics were a competitive third. A total of 665 ceramics were recovered from the 2 units. The most popular type by far was plain whiteware, which is this guy right here. And it easily could have been part of a larger decorative plate, but the piece that I have is plain. But there was plenty of decorated ceramics as well. There were a variety of transfer prints, including brown, black, red, pink, blue, and purple. And I have an example of black, red, and this piece was actually burnt, which was interesting. It's actually blue transfer print, but it's been burned. Hand-painted decorations were also a common theme amongst the ceramic. So I've got a little bit of hand-painted here and here. They appear to be floral designs. We know he was married. We don't know who he was married to, but I would like to think she liked pretty ceramics and like the hand-painted ones. Looking at metal artifacts recovered, there were 98 cut nail fragments and 1 perfectly preserved cut nail, which is right here, which is a miracle because that area, obviously with the continual flooding, most things don't last out there in that state of preservation. So I got incredibly lucky with that. So the recovery of these nail fragments means it's highly suggestive that an 1800 structure, having been in the vicinity of these units, and had I read the GPR results correctly, maybe I would have actually hit one. There was also a total of 77 glass fragments recovered from both units, with brandy bottle glass being the easiest to identify and contributing 19 fragments. So I know the man, this is brandy bottle glass right here, I know the man liked his brandy, or alcohol in general, because we call it brandy bottle glass, but all sorts of alcohol would come in it. And then this is just a piece of aqua bottle glass. The most interesting artifacts recovered from Jacques Medy's house were a possible rim from a cut iron kettle and a brass furniture tack. This being the rim of what we think is a cut iron kettle. And if it is, and we are correct in that analysis, it is evidence of Native American influence and suggestive of a Métis household. The one thing that makes Métis households very difficult to track is they would have just used everyday ceramics and household goods as their neighbor Frenchmen. It would only be in a few things that you might see some Native American influence. The brass furniture tack, which is right here, and I actually had to Google this in the field because I was like, oh God, did I find like modern stuff this far deep? What's going on? But no, they were invented in the late 1700s. I can use this to suggest that Jacques Medy had furniture and that the poor man wasn't just stuck sitting on the ground in his own home. And the design has not changed in over 200 years. So it made it easy to identify, but then also made me very, very nervous because I was like, this looks modern, what's going on? What these results suggest is that while I did miss placing my units over the identified anomalies, I was indeed within an 1830s house site, and my predictive modeling of historic Kaskaskia is accurate. I did not find any artifacts dating later than the 1840s. I didn't have any modern trash to include like 1950s, anything like that, or even late 1800s. What I would like to see come out of these results is more investigative research into what remains of Kaskaskia. There is the potential for French Kaskaskia, British Kaskaskia, the Revolutionary War battleground, and most of American Kaskaskia to still exist. I would like for the town to stop being written off as ceasing to exist because the people who inhabit the island have a history worth remembering and being recognized. Kaskaskia is not gone, it is simply forgotten and buried. It is time to be remembered and for scholars not to ignore what the residents in the ground are telling us. And this image here is actually Bill Creed's father, William. He ran the ferry from Kaskaskia side of the Mississippi to the Chester, Illinois side of the Mississippi, and he ran it all the way into the 1950s, if I'm not mistaken. This is the church that is on Kaskaskia Island. It's the one that moved brick by brick. They still have weekly Sunday Mass, and I actually was invited to attend Mass on Easter Sunday, and I did. It's beautiful inside. I will admit it's not as grand and like breathtaking as the church here in St. Genevieve, but it is still absolutely stunning inside. And they actually had the bishop from the Belfield Diocese there to give Mass, and they brought out the communal chalice that was used for the first Easter Mass between the Jesuits and the Kaskaskia Indians from the 1600s. So I got to take communal Mass from a 1600s chalice, and I may have geeked out a little bit. And then here is us digging at Kaskaskia, my very happy field crew, and definitely not me taking advantage of friendships and undergrads for free field labor. I promise you they are happy in this, very happy. And then this is my friend Gabrielle, who went out with me after mass amounts of rain in the middle of my field work, and we discovered that the units flooded despite us and our tarping them in our best efforts, and the buckets weren't working to get the water out. And I had bribed her that morning with a Casey's coffee to go out with me, and that Casey's to-go coffee cup was the only thing that worked well for getting the water out. So not sponsored by Casey's, but if they want to fund my research in the future, their cups hold up to water very well. And thank you. Were there any questions for me?
I'm curious, what method did you use, or how did you know how to place the overlay of the historic map onto your big photograph of the landscape today?
So it was actually quite the process. So I had to build back in layers. So the USGS has pre-georeferenced historical maps, georeference referring to when I upload them into ArcGIS, they automatically lay over the landscape where they should be. And that brought me back to 1915. But even between 1830 and 1915, the landscape had changed way too much. So I used don't quote me exactly, 1874, I think is the year, map that actually hangs on the wall in the Chester Library. And I took that and I had to manually georeference that, which means I had to pick points on this map, on this 1874 map that matched the underneath 1915 map, and stretch it across the landscape. And then from there, I was able to place the Sidney Breese map onto that, and then the Pittman map onto the Sidney Breese map. So there was a lot of ways this could have gone wrong, which is why I didn't want to just keep my thesis with these overlays and be like, well, it's predictive modeling, we don't know, but look what I did, it's cool, right? No, I wanted concrete proof that this is a way for archaeologists to utilize historical maps to recover lost landscapes, especially when there's nothing left on the surface to give any sort of indication that anything was once there.
Were you able to judge how accurately drawn those historic maps were? Was the scale, I mean, they look accurate as we're looking at them today, but was there a way that you could say, yes, this guy was spot on in his map making?
No, it would actually be a combination of not only him being accurate, but me being accurate in my overlays. And since I did not find any features, like I didn't find, again, mostly that's on me. I read the GPR results wrong. I read them backwards. I did not have them flipped facing my starting corner. So when I put them on the landscape, I was like, okay, it's 6 meters this way, 8 meters this way. It was from the wrong direction. And again, that's on me. But one way we would be able to tell is with continued research. And if we do find the house where the supposed southeast corner of the house is, and we do find the house there, then that'll give us a better idea of how accurate their maps are and how accurate my mapping is.
So you could reuse more data to go backwards?
Mm-hmm. Yep, everything builds upon itself.
It's very interesting.
Thanks.
number one, kudos to you for admitting to your committee and to the world of your mistakes. It's our mistakes how we learn. Also, do you remember how far it was from when you drove from the church to where you were doing your digs or your plots? How long that was? Was it a mile?
It's about 2 miles.
2 miles. All right.
It's about 2 miles. You actually have to go past the levee.
Yeah,
So you
okay.
drive up and over the levee, and old Kaskaskia exists outside the levee. But it's about 2 miles, give or take. Yes.
Fantastic job. I really enjoyed the presentation.
Thank you.
And for those of you who aren't archaeologists and don't know, digging square holes like that into the ground is insanely difficult, and those were beautiful. So
Thank you. You have no idea how happy that makes me to hear that. If you talk to any of my previous students on field schools, I am a stickler for clean walls. I have a standard that has to be kept. And so to hear that from another professional, thank you very much.
I do have a question.
Oh.
Before you, sorry. Your alluvial layers, I love the stratigraphic profile you showed. Have you attempted to date any of those from historical documentation?
No, that is on my laundry list of things I would eventually like to research into and look at. The Forest Service actually has flood records where they have, they show what was underwater and when, and through that I might be able to figure out the dating of those layers. I would very much like to. But the other problem with this is that area of Kaskaskia, according to locals, floods almost every spring. So they're not these extreme floods like we remember from the 1993 flood. Well, I wasn't born, but I remember that. Like those who do remember the 1993 flood, it was catastrophic for anybody near the Mississippi. They're not experiencing that year after year, but they are experiencing minimal flooding every year in that area. So that is also makes it hard to tell how much has been deposited and when. I can tell the big events, but if it's depositing a little bit every single year, then it does get a little difficult.
Not being an archaeologist, I'm not familiar with some of the letters you were using.
Yeah.
What made that picture? Is that LiDAR?
Let me go back. You tell me when to stop, okay? Oh, no.
You showed on the anomaly.
Oh. Anomalies. This data?
Yes, is that LiDAR?
No. So this is GPR, so this is ground penetrating radar. It's this big hulking machine on a cart that I push across the ground, and it sends radar signals into the ground. And where things match in material, it sends the radar back in the same frequency. If it hits a different material, it's going to reflect differently, and a different signal is going to be registered by the machine, letting us know that an anomaly is there. This graphic that you're seeing here is from me processing the results that the GPR computer had, and processing those results through a laptop into data that can be interpretable.
Would LiDAR be not that accurate or more accurate?
So I did use LiDAR in helping lay the Pittman map over the Sydney Breeze map because the French fort Kaskaskia, it's an earthworks fort, so the dirt for the side of the fort is built up, it's mounded. And I was able to use that as a pinpoint to place the fort across and stretch it across the river. But looking at that LiDAR data, you would not be able to see anything because it's not mounded up. There's nothing, it is completely flat. You walk out there and you go, what is that girl talking about? There is literally nothing here. And even if you put a shovel in the ground and did a shovel test, which is a survey style that a lot of archaeologists use for an initial phase 1 survey, which we just dig down until we hit a soil change typically, or 50 centimeters. And if you did that with this site, you would never hit anything. It is so far buried. If you can ask anybody who is out there with me, Jackson included, he's back there, I was getting very nervous that nothing was going to be there and I'd have nothing to show for all of this work until we hit a brick at about around 55 centimeters below the top of my unit. And you would think that this brick was like a Spanish coin for how I celebrated. I was like, it's a brick! And they're like, I have undergrads looking at me going, has she lost her mind? It's a brick. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. It's here. There's a brick. And it's historical. It's fantastic. Yeah, I celebrated way too much over a brick. But that brick led to more and more artifacts, which, yeah, you wouldn't see anything on the surface with LiDAR. To get back to your question. Yes, ma'am.
Do you know about that chalice that you saw on Easter Sunday? Do you know of what happened 26 years ago to that chalice?
No, I don't.
Probably not.
Did I just start a rivalry or?
No.
Okay.
I just thought since it was so special to you, it was considered special by then Bishop, now Cardinal Wilton Gregory, when he was in charge of Belleville, that he loaned it to St. Louis when Pope John Paul II visited. And it was on the altar when he said Mass at the Dome in downtown St. Louis, because it was such a historic thing. It was on the altar.
Well, now I'm going to geek out even more. Thanks. That's really amazing. Thank you.
That was on January 26th of 1999.
Okay. I was born in September of 2000, so unfortunately I would never have been able to witness that. Not to make anybody feel bad about my age. Yes, ma'am.
Mine is sort of a multifaceted question, and
Okay.
maybe people in the audience can help you.
What?
But before the old Kaskaskia church went into the river, they moved a lot of bodies over where Fort Kaskaskia is. Not all of them had stones, but there were some bodies that were buried in the church, like there are in this church. And I can't seem to find out whether they were moved, if they were left, whether they were reburied in the current church, or if they were left in the church, water to its course. If so, did you ever find any human bones, remains?
Okay, so she's asking if I ever found any human remains at Kaskaskia from the cemeteries or the church being removed. So the church you're talking about is actually the church that is still currently on the island. It was moved brick by brick. They salvaged it before it could fall in. I am not aware of them transferring the bodies that were in the church with the church. That is something I can definitely look into. I was not digging in the area of where the cemeteries were. I specifically avoided that area because if you find human remains on any archaeological site, you have to call the coroner. And the coroner will be like, it's historical remains, I'll get there when I get there. And you have to stop digging. So it would have shut down my site, and I'd have to wait for the coroner, which could be anywhere between an hour to 8 hours of me just sitting in a chair going, yeah, this is a burial, that's a femur, okay. I'm just gonna sit here and watch this body, I guess. But there is evidence that not all of the remains were removed from these cemeteries, which is very unfortunate, but is a common practice for the time. In a lot of cases, they just removed the headstones. I actually have a colleague who did his thesis on these cemeteries and did GPR and magnetometer over the cemeteries at Garrison Hill, and where they supposedly moved these bodies to. And he has seen evidence of there being headstones but no bodies, and it could be that they're not there, or it could be that there is so little left to reflect back, which is also a possibility. The soil in Illinois is acidic enough that it does leach bones. So depending on preservation levels when they were moved, their deterioration could be to the point that there's not really much left to reflect back. But they did have an issue in the 1990s, where human remains were washing out the bank of into the Mississippi on Kaskaskia Island. So the Army Corps of Engineers actually went in and dumped rock onto the sides of the island to try to prevent any further erosion and kind of keep those people in place. There was also recovery of headstones. They found more headstones out there, which are actually currently behind the building. They moved them, which we try not to move things once they're in place. Like, so if you come across a field and you see a headstone and you're like, well, this is weird, there's not a cemetery here, please don't move the headstone. There probably was a cemetery there at some point. But the locals picked up the headstones and moved them behind the building. That house is the Liberty Bell, because they thought they were preserving it. And they are correct, it didn't fall into the river, but you know, we like to try to keep things in place. And then I also heard through people of the island that Beaver Island, which was actually once part of Maine Kaskaskia, that there are headstones over on that side as well. So to sort of answer your question, I don't know what happened to the remains, and most people do not either because of the time period. Some people were moved, some people weren't, and it's an unfortunate fact of the matter.
So if they were buried under the pew, it seems to me like they would have been buried under the pew of the new church.
I would have to double check. I did not see any evidence when I was in the church of like a plaque indicating burial. But it is possible, and it's something I can look into, but I do not know that at this time. Yes, ma'am?
Two of the priests that were buried under the church were moved up to Archaeological. And they're in the cemetery and two of the older dead. We don't know for sure where they moved those others. And some people don't believe in it, but they have done grave ditching, and they may have been buried next to the new church, which indicates that there are bodies there. If you believe in the grave ditching that happened on it, and the way it shows, they're in rows. Then of course when you do that, that'll also give you animals if they were there. But animals don't die in rows. That was but I feel that very possibly they were very next to the new church on it. I was certified, I don't know, did it all up, I guess, and do DNA, which is real. I don't know if you've ever proved that. You just have to believe it. You want to believe that. I know Maria Lorenzo's relatives come far alive wanting to find her grave. She was one that was there.
That's my question. She was buried under the pew.
And so we think, well, so was one of my great friends. And so, and I know you have a lot of material to cover to kind of feed us into some of your initial part, but perhaps it would be more clear. The British garrison did not come into Kaskaskia until 1772. And I don't want to be in trouble with my fortune trumpet because they do a ceremony every year showing when the British came into Fort Deschamps in 1765. And they stayed there until the fort was not falling down around them. And there's 20 British and many French out in that area, which were not helping the British at all. So in 1772, they had enough, and they came down to the town of Kaskaskia, and that's when they took over the Jesuit house and turned it into what they renamed Fort Gage after the British General Gage. Fort Kaskaskia was always on top of the bluff. And of course they weren't there very long because the Resurrecting Clark came in 1778. We got rid of Fort Gage, and no longer. It had a very sharp existence. So that part could be confusing from, I did overlays from the modern map, which I was familiar with, and the old one out of the Randolph County Court Assessor's Office, which had many official maps there with the old fellow there that knew it very well. And we did the overlay. The drawings came out from the office in Springfield, because they have been called, and when you do the overlay, excuse me, you see that when that river, and this took many years for it to be realized to be a navigation area. You can find in the we had newspapers early on before that, and in the 1900s newspapers that were in Chester, you'll find say, well, second steamboats coming up the river now, they're going to take the right channel or the left channel, because they were using both of those. The left came up around and past St. Mary's and towards St. Genevieve, and the right one then began to develop after many years. But this was early 1900s, which is a lot of resources. So that, and then I found in the overlay, which I hadn't realized before, that it actually, when it started going over it started out as a very small place, and it kept enlarging, but actually it took more off of the eastern side out in front of the pier of the Archival. And I know some of the people that worked there by the time when the river was very, very low, and the sandbar was way out, and they walked out from the house, from the pier of our house, and found the evidence of the boathouse that the airmen are down in Kaskaskia very there. And there were all kinds of ferries all over the time. And so we know that as the river changed, it actually encroached from the eastern side more so than it did the western side. And then if you look at the map of Kaskaskia, you'll know the Judgment House, and they have a very large lot that led right to the Kaskaskia River when they first set it up. But there were other houses in north of them, and some of those families had pretty big lots, and they had their family cemeteries. And I think that was a confusing thing, because there was just a few people. If any of them got bored, and heaven knows people created stories of the people of them showing, but they probably would have come from those families that had family cemeteries right along the Kaskaskia River. So they did take some of that.
Stop the We're going to have to finish and move on. I know you know a lot about Kaskaskia.
Yes, and it may not have been clear in my presentation, and for that I do apologize, but I did say in 1772 they entered Kaskaskia. It was when they were first crossing through the area in 1765 that the Pittman map was made.
Quick question here. In your research in Kaskaskia, did you see any references to Fujo?
Yes.
Is that considered a suburb of Kaskaskia or a separate town?
If you talk to the locals, it's considered a separate town.
How's that spelled?
That's Josephville. But a man named Fujo had no relatives, and he left all his money to the school district. And they built a school there, and he's honored at the old Fujo School. And it's just right over the levee and the crossing right there. And so, of course, the school there being made object of people that became known as Fujo. But officially, it was Smith, Henry Smith, that is Roosevelt. Fujo was never a town.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you.